Today, I'm here with Dr. Graham Lau, and I'm so excited to have you. Thank you again for joining us here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to join you.
The first thing I want to ask is really why astrobiology matters to you and why it should matter to everyone.
Yeah, ever since I was a young child, I've been interested in big questions that humanity has faced for the millennia. Ever since our ancestors started looking at the stars at night and started developing civilization and mathematics and culture and religion and trying to understand who and what we are, we've had these really big questions. Why are we here? Where did we come from? Is there something else out there in the night for us to explore and know more about? Could there be other beings in the cosmos who also have developed civilizations and cultures and religions and mythologies and stories of themselves and who they are that we could share with? And so when I started studying the sciences, I was really intrigued that there's all these different kinds of scientific topics that can come together to start addressing some of these larger questions too. And so, through my education, I slowly meandered more and more into this realm of wanting to ask these big questions and be involved in this pursuit of understanding what life is.
Definitely, I'm the same as well. When I noticed that there was an actual scientific approach to asking kind of metaphysical questions, I was like, wow. And when I realized it was a tangible field that there are actual scientists pursuing, it's incredible. And I know it's exploding right now. I think there's more and more people getting involved and realizing the same thing, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely growing around the world. I get to interact with young students and people of all ages, honestly, from around the world on a constant basis due to my job. And it's so enlightening seeing how many people want to be involved in these bigger questions.
Mhm. Definitely. And it's interesting because most people are already enchanted with this idea of finding alien life. And I don't know, why do you think that is? What is it about something else being out there that we really want to believe in?
Yeah, it's the human mystery. We explore mysteries. We're wanderers, and we've always been wanderers, and we're wanderers still, as Carl Sagan once said. We want
Mhm.
to know the mystery. It's like reading a good novel that has a story that's a mystery, or watching a good movie that has a mystery in it. Like you want to know where it's going to go, and so a lot of us are driven into that mystery. We look at the night, the darkness of the night, and the stars out there, and certainly science has unraveled a lot of the mystery. We know those stars are giant fusing balls of elements far and far away, but we've also now given ourselves more intrigue and more mystery. Could there be worlds around all the stars? Could any of those worlds have life? It's a huge mystery and one that I think is part of our civilizational evolution.
Mhm. Definitely. We also don't exactly know what we mean by life, right? This has been a huge debate. There's no consensus yet. And I know you've emphasized that a lot. And obviously, this is a bit of a problem, right? Because the field kind of depends, the progress of astrobiology really depends on whether we can find this thing that we don't know what we're looking for.
Hmm? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. We can't define life. We tried over 300 times. There are many attempts at a definition of life, and we don't really have one. And so we try to characterize what life is and what it isn't. But until we find another example of it beyond our own biosphere, we're still very limited in our thinking of what life could be. And the same thing goes for intelligence, consciousness. There are these larger questions about our existence that we really can't define. Maybe we're limited by language, maybe we're limited by our kinds of thinking, but yeah, they're very difficult concepts for us to face. And so we're kind of doing the best with what we have right now.
Yeah, definitely, especially the limitations of language, I feel like are key here because really, ultimately, we can't constrain phenomena in the universe with words. The way we describe something isn't what that thing is in reality. And so we're kind of always misrepresenting reality, but we're doing the best we can. It still has obviously a lot of utility describing things. So, what is your favorite kind of conclusion or definition that is the most encapsulating for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Of the many attempts we've had to define life, the one that we use the most right now in astrobiology is what's called the NASA definition. It was created by Jerry Joyce and some others back in the 1990s. And it's this definition that life is a self contained chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. That's a bit of a mouthful, but that's the best we can do right now in defining life. I will say that, I think, yes, like language, we're limited a little bit. Like language is a model, it's a model that we use to describe our own experiences of the universe. And at least we get some of the things right. Like there's some of the things we share. Like we can share similar ideas about similar colors and experiences that we're having, certain emotional experiences, but we're most certainly probably missing out on a lot of the explanation of what this experience of consciousness and life really is, because we don't really have the language or capability of sharing that yet. Maybe in the near future, we'll unlock some more of that through neuroscience, through developing artificial intelligence. We might be in for some large discoveries in the near future just through some of these creations of our own and some of these explorations of our own that help us to better understand, this whole experience of being alive.
Definitely. It's interesting, in Hindu cosmology, there was the god Brahma who was asked if he could describe the entire nature of the universe. And he said that he could through words, but that it would take longer than an eternity to do so. So I just think that really encapsulates how complex the universe is and how much more there is than we can not just understand, but maybe even ever describe.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, and it's one reason I love science fiction so much. It helps us to have some fun telling stories that could be, horror or adventure or whatever, but it also allows us to explore these bigger questions. What happens if we meet a machine that can answer something like that? What happens if we meet an alien being who has a different experience of consciousness? What if our time perception isn't the only form of time perception? What if there are other beings who experience time in a far more different and differently meaning kind of way? We don't know what to expect for that yet.
Speaking of sci-fi, I definitely wanted to ask your thoughts on how sci-fi has influenced the field of astrobiology, whether that's good or bad.
Yeah.
What are your
I mean, I
thoughts?
love it so much. I ask every guest who comes on my show, Ask an Astrobiologist, I ask them what stories have inspired them to want to know more about life in the universe. And almost every single actually no, every single person I've ever had on the show has at least an answer, if not many answers, of different books and movies and television shows. And sometimes there's really intriguing things in there. We have one person who likes romance stories, and but for the most part, a lot of those who are involved in astrobiology have some science fiction, fantasy stories that have a lot to them, have made them want to learn more, explore more. I think there's a lot to be said for this in the history of science fiction through the millennia, honestly, of what we've been asking ourselves, some of these bigger questions, especially in more modern science fiction. With the early work of people like Mary Shelley, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, kind of unleashing this understanding that we can question where we're going with our technology, but we can also ask deep philosophical questions about ourselves and our technology together at the same time.
I agree. What is your favorite sci-fi story and also your favorite depiction of alien life?
Yeah.
What do you think did it well?
Wow. So, I mean, I love Dune. I reread Dune at least once a year, and I have been doing that since
Wow.
I was a teenager. And so I've read it many times now. It's a fantastic book. I will admit I've never read anything from Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son, and his co-author Kevin J. Anderson. I've been thinking about exploring some of those novels as well, but I've read the original Dune series from Frank Herbert many times. I think one of my favorite science fiction stories of all time, though, is Olaf Stapleton's Star Maker, which he wrote in the 1930s. It's an exploration of consciousness. In the story, the narrator is a human being whose consciousness leaves his body and travels out into space. He views the Earth from space long before we, in reality, ever sent any humans into space. The consciousness goes out and experiences meeting alien life, becomes a galactic consciousness and then a universal consciousness, and kind of has this large scale meeting with the Star Maker, with this concept of there being a larger structure to the universe that maybe has some role in the initial Big Bang and the formation of our universe and its history over time. But what I really love the most about the story is actually the prologue from Olaf Stapleton. When he was writing it and sharing it with friends in the 1930s, a lot of people were saying, right now with Europe poised on the brink of war, and they knew war was coming, people knew that, there was something very bad happening inside of Germany. People were aware that there was a large change in the near future. And so he had people asking him, like, why would you write a story about, space travel and aliens and stuff like that at a time like this? And his response is really just prescient and beautiful. He notes that perhaps at a time like this, when we have crisis, that an attempt to place ourselves amongst the stars and see ourselves in the backdrop of stars together will actually increase our charity towards one another rather than lessen it. And I find that very powerful given where the world was at that point. And I think it still matters today in our current human crises that we're facing across the globe. And so I think Star Maker is probably my favorite because of that. And when it comes to alien depictions, it's interesting. A lot of our science fiction, we're telling human stories in science fiction. And so a lot of times you have not just the historical need to have humans in ape suits for Planet of the Apes, or the alien makeup on the human being to make them look like an alien-ish being. It was cheaper and easier for production studios making films and television shows to do that. But it also is about telling human stories. And so, of course, in Star Wars, most of the beings look very much like humans. In Star Trek, most of the beings look very much like humans. It's because we want to talk to ourselves and about ourselves. But there have been some explorations of what aliens could be like if they were different that I really appreciate throughout science fiction. Even the original film Alien with Ridley Scott, I think they did a fantastic job of exploring how there's a very alien conceptual idea of like this egg. The face hugger comes out. It's kind of like an insectoid looking kind of thing. It grabs on, but then when it grows the new alien being inside of the human body, it kind of replicates some of the human DNA and uses it as a pattern for making this new creature, this xenomorph. I love that concept. There have been a few attempts in some of the Star Trek and Star Wars and other mainstream science fiction stories to present a really alien being. But there's also some other stories out there, things like Solaris. What happens if there is a planetary consciousness and we're not able to really even communicate with it? And so it's trying through its own methods to communicate to us. And it actually is a terrible experience for us because its communication method actually impacts how we dream or how we experience the world around us. I also really love the idea in Arrival, based on the short story by Ted Chiang, Stories of Our Lives. I love this idea that there could be beings who are experiencing time differently. And because of that, their language is sculpted differently. And it requires the work of a very intelligent linguist to try to figure out how they're speaking, how to structure their language, and in the process starts to gain some understanding of how they actually experience the universe.
Mhm. It's really powerful as well, like you mentioned before, having a look at ourselves and who we are in an astrobiological context, because as we know, we are star stuff. We are the remnants of elements from the death of stars. And I think that has so much power and it's so profound that people are not super conscious of that as much as we should be. And I feel like it might not be enough even to identify ourselves as humans, as humanity, because really we're even more than that. We're the entire universe, kind of. What do you think about that?
Yeah, we are the cosmos coming to understand itself, right? And we're not
Mhm.
just humans. Like we love to think of ourselves as individuals, but we have a microbiome inside of us made of trillions of other organisms, these little single-celled organisms inside of our bodies, on our bodies, in our hair, in our skin, in our colons, our bodies everywhere. And so we are a consortium of creatures ourselves, and then we live on a world that has a biosphere that itself is highly connected and networked across the entire planet. And some of the beings, some of these individual cells or individual organisms come and go, but the biosphere itself has continued on through several mass extinctions, through many changes over time, from the dinosaurs to us, and even long ago in the history of our planet. And so we have 4 billion-year-old superorganism here now coming to understand itself through the evolution of human beings on the surface of the planet. But it makes me wonder too, like there are certainly signs of intelligence amongst other creatures on our planet who also come from the same elemental material that came here when our star was born and our planet was born. And we're now kind of getting close, I think, to maybe being able to actually have some communication with whales and dogs and other creatures across our planet on a meaningful level. And so, what is that going to tell us about ourselves? How will our planet's intellectual capacity change when the intelligent beings start speaking to each other on the planet alone? And then, let alone if we find an alien civilization out there, how we'll have some kind of a conversation about what connects us across the expanse of space. And a large part of that connection is our cosmological history the development of our elements in the Big Bang, the development of elements inside of stars, and then the variations that have happened through time as well.
Mhm. Yeah. So, as beautiful as astrobiology is and its role in increasing our perspective on the universe, the world, who we are, the field of science has a little bit of critiques. Actually, a Nature paper came out pretty recently trying to address critiques that astrobiology gets. It's called "Is Astrobiology Serious Science?" And most of the arguments revolved around that we haven't made much progress, or we haven't had tangible results in terms of origin of life and the discovery of extraterrestrial life yet, as well as its proximity to a sci-fi nature. What would you say in response to that?
Yeah, there's, I think, two primary approaches I would have for that. The first is, kind of what Jill Tarter of SETI and others have said in the past. When it comes to searching for possible life out there or intelligent life out there, we've barely just begun. It's a very nascent kind of realm of understanding of actually looking for alien life. And so if you take like, radio signals, for instance, and us listening for this very short window of time over the last less than a century, trying to listen for signals, some people have calculated like what we basically have done is taken like a hot tub's volume of water and said out of the entire ocean of water that there's no alien life because this little hot tub's worth doesn't have life. And we know that's not the case. Our ocean is full of life. And so the cosmos might be as well. We just haven't really listened or looked far enough yet. We're still kind of looking in our own backyard and taking little baby steps away from our planet to explore out there. But I also, and I've heard some of these comments before, critiques of astrobiology. I know one very well established senior scientist who likes to refer to astrobiology as a religion when he makes fun of it. But I think that kind of thinking is very wrong. I think it comes from an old school style of thinking about what science is that is also very, very wrong. And so you have these people who come up in biology or chemistry or physics departments, and they've never learned to walk outside of their building and go to another building and say hi to somebody who studies something different than them. And so they've like siloed themselves into this realm of thinking that science is just their one thing. And that's not how science has ever functioned. It's not how science works. In many ways, breaking science apart into disciplines was extremely good and very bad for scientific thinking. So long ago, we had these ideas of like natural philosophy, natural history. That included things like medicine, understanding life, understanding chemistry, trying to explore optics and mathematics. But then, people kind of realized that there was some value in having individual people specialize in a topic. And so that kind of led to this breaking apart of natural philosophy and natural history into all these disciplines of biology and chemistry and geology and such. And it was great because it allowed people to gain expertise and really go deep in problems in those realms. But it also meant we had this siloing effect, this binning effect, where people weren't talking to each other about what they knew. And as recently as a few decades ago, you had physicists who had no knowledge whatsoever of biology. And so they would make these grand statements about how biology functions, and they would be flat wrong almost instantly because they didn't have the language or the knowledge or expertise of biology. And the same thing goes across the board in all these different disciplines. You had people who really only knew their one little sub discipline. And then we have more modern fields now kind of emerging. Astrobiology certainly has been this culmination of a long period of human study, but only in recent times has it really started to function where it brings people out of the silos. It brings people from chemistry and biology and physics and geology and philosophy and sociology, all these different realms of human thought together. It forces us to have a bit of a shared language, a bit of a shared understanding, to know a little bit more about each other's specialties so that we can speak across these discipline boundaries. And that really has allowed all of the disciplines involved in astrobiology to start gaining more ground a lot faster. It's become a more comprehensive and holistic human approach, really, to answering larger questions.
I think it's one of the most interdisciplinary fields out there
Yeah.
in science. Yeah. I also wanted to ask about your thoughts on the recent UAP reports, and so unidentified aerial phenomena reports, and the congressional hearings revolving that. Particularly, what I've noticed is a lot of astrobiologists are pretty silent on this front. And it makes sense because, there's not a lot of evidence that we can talk about, right? But I know for a fact that astrobiologists are among those who would like to see alien life the most. So, what are your thoughts on that? And what kind of evidence do you think we would need to really have a meaningful discussion to start having one?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first off, one thing you see is there are a lot of scientists, not just astrobiologists or those who are connected to astrobiology. I think science in general, there's this really big, almost defensive reaction that happens when you start discussing things like UAP, UFO kind of ideas, experience reports of people being abducted or seeing things and thinking it's alien visitation. And it just comes from the history of how this has kind of evolved through time, where people get very emotional and kind of have a hard time disentangling their own personal experiences from what the science could mean for us. And so there have been scientists over time who tried to engage with this idea of UFOs and UAP and explore, is there any actual science to it? And it's been kind of hard because some of those scientists get laughed out of their departments and out of their fields. It's made for a very hard conversation. But I think you'll see that there's a lot more of us now who would love to apply more scientific rigor to exploring UAP. You have groups like Avi Loeb's Galileo Project out of Harvard who are planning on putting a bunch of observation posts around the planet to look up at the sky all the time in different wavelengths, possibly trying to understand what UAP are or could be. You have others like Jacob Hawk Misra and Ravi Kaparapu who have argued in Scientific American and other places that we should be applying scientific rigor to the exploration of UAP and what they may or may not be. It still remains difficult because some people just get very intense in their understanding of what they think these things are. And the issue is that some people don't quite understand that science isn't about having a belief or a conclusion first and then trying to find the data to fit that conclusion. It's really about looking at all the data, making the observations, looking at the data, and then saying, what do these data actually tell us? And a lot of people get upset if they hear that we've actually looked into some UAP experience report and we've actually found data that suggests it could be a military spy plane being developed in the deserts of Nevada or something like that. And so that's kind of like created this barrier, I think, between scientists and those who really feel very personally that this is aliens visiting us right now. The visitation is happening. That said, though, I think we are in this interesting moment right now where the interest is growing. People are hearing a lot more about UAP, and a lot of people have had personal experiences. I've talked to lots of people who don't think necessarily it was an abduction or that it was aliens contacting them personally, but that they had an experience, they saw something or felt something that they could not explain. And so they reach out to people like myself or other scientists, and then they ask, like, what could this be? And sometimes we don't have answers. Sometimes we just don't know. And there's a realm of human experiences, things that we could be experiencing that could explain it that we just don't understand ourselves yet. Or, there is the possibility that it is aliens. Maybe it could be aliens, or maybe it could be humans from the future time traveling and things like that. And I think it's worth at least applying some scientific rigor and being open to the data that come in to try to understand what we find.
Definitely. Otherwise, we're stopping before we
Yeah.
start if we don't bother to look at the data. Yeah. So there's definitely that balance between our hubris and keeping that open mind, right, to what could be out there. Because honestly, that is how science progresses. It's always challenging a lot of skepticism and the common beliefs, but with rationality for sure. It's always applying that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm really excited to see how it pans out. And definitely with scientists getting involved, that's the only way to move forward from this. Otherwise, there's no other
Yeah.
way.
Otherwise, it just continues being, like this emotional thing where people are very into their
Mhm.
experiences, but not really able to engage, with a skeptic kind of viewpoint towards it. And if anything, it's just another reminder, which we have, across the board in our society, that we need to be better about having open, rational, and healthy conversations and debates. So many people go into a conversation or an argument and they think the point is to win the argument, that somehow they're going to win, they're right, the other person is wrong no matter what. And that's really not the point of argumentation. Our argumentation is to learn about what other people are experiencing and learning, and maybe along the way together to build better knowledge for all of humanity.
I agree. So I was also wondering about once we do travel to other planets, as inevitably we will be planting a flag. right? We will be planting an American flag, whatever country flag. And I've heard it proposed also to plant an Earth flag, perhaps. What do you think we should do? And what maybe we do we really need a flag at all? I don't know.
Yeah, I personally lean towards us not needing a flag, but
Okay.
being part of Blue Marble Space and the Blue Marble Space Institute of Science, the birth of our organization came when Sanjoy Som was at a UN meeting, and there was a conversation just about this very idea, like should astronauts be carrying flags of individual nations or an Earth flag? And Sanjoy happened to have the Earth Day flag in his backpack at that moment. And so he stood up in this giant room full of people at the UN and he's like, what about this flag? And it's the Earth Day flag. So it's a blue background with a picture of the blue marble image in the middle. And a lot of people were intrigued, so much so that Sanjoy, even though he was a scientist and an engineer at that point, decided to create his own nonprofit organization focused on this vision of a common identity of our Earth as our common shared purpose. Our goal and the flag that we would plant would be an Earth flag, representing not just all of us as humans, but also all of the other species, all of the other organisms on our planet. You know, our biosphere isn't just humans. And even when we go to the moon again, or we go to Mars and we plant whatever flag or no flag, we aren't just going on behalf of ourselves. We're taking along organisms with us, certainly on our bodies, in our bodies, in the habitat with us, but most likely also organisms that we intend to grow and cultivate and maybe even one day use to help bring about other biospheres. And so we aren't just, the single seed coming out of the earth. We are many different seeds coming together in this journey.
Definitely. Speaking of Earth as well, so astronauts, when they leave Earth's atmosphere, they experience the overview effect, right? Could you go over what that is and yeah, how would you explain it?
Yeah. The author Frank White, who's a friend of mine, in 1987, he published the book, The Overview Effect. It's now in its fourth edition, and it's a fantastic read. And what started off for Frank, as he often relays in his own conversations, is he was interested in knowing what the astronauts were experiencing. He wanted to interview all of them. He noticed that there were like interviews here and there on like TV, late night shows and stuff of astronauts, but that no one was like collecting all of the shared experiences that astronauts were reporting. And so he reached out to NASA and he found out that he's allowed to reach out to former astronauts who've been to space on his own. And so he started doing that. And he got a lot of the original astronauts from all the original programs from NASA and cosmonauts and others to respond and do interviews with him. And as he started slowly collecting their reports of what they experienced going into space and looking back and seeing Earth and coming back from space, he started noticing some trends in the things they were saying, that a lot of them were noting that they felt a personal moment of awe, a shift in their own experience of being human, that many of them were reporting that they were seeing themselves as something more than just the individual, as like the part of this larger network of a biosphere of our planet. A lot of them report on like the fragility of our little tenuous wisp of atmosphere protecting this entire biosphere from space. A lot of them would also report things like being upset with the state of affairs of human civilization, of wanting to do things to make it better. And so Frank wrote this book, The Overview Effect, and where he thought kind of deeply about, what is this feeling? And he first starts off kind of relating it to his own experiences flying. When you're looking down from an airplane, it changes your perspective. You start seeing the earth not only far differently than you probably have in your own life in your first flight, but far more different than most of our ancestors. And by most, I mean almost all of our ancestors by a long shot never saw the earth from thousands of feet up, let alone 30,000 feet up in the air. And then, now with astronauts, now we have, miles and miles and miles above the earth looking back down, or out from the viewpoint of the moon looking back. And so certainly there's a lot to be said for this concept that maybe seeing the earth from the outside is an experience of awe that is causing a psychological shift. Now, it is fair to point out that there's been no rigorous scientific study of the overview effect. And so we can't say psychologically, like you go into space and it just happens, like you have the overview effect. It's more of this is like a shared experience that a lot of people are reporting. And so not everyone who goes to space reports the exact same experience. And not everyone who goes to space necessarily comes back and tries to be a better person and change the world. But it is a very impactful experience. In my own life, I've had many experiences of all being in remote places on the planet in the high Arctic and up on top of mountains. It just changes your perspective I also think in moments of meditation, when we start having these transcendent experiences inside ourselves, or kind of, experiencing ourselves, experiencing the world, those moments too can be very awe-inspiring and life-changing for a lot of us. And so I think what Frank really is tapping into there in this idea of the overview effect is how much we can change ourselves when we have these very deep transcendental experiences.
Yeah, I agree, and I think a lot of people would benefit from having this perspective. It could really be powerful, and I'm really hopeful for the future of commercial spaceflight. More and more people will get to experience it.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Um,
will say, so like a lot of us talk about, space for all, and how right now like commercial space flight is opening up space flight to everyone. That's not true. And it's very sad to say it, but right now it's still billionaires and millionaires who are paying for the tickets on these flights. There have been a few people who've been given tickets, they've been granted tickets by the billionaires, but so far space flight is very unequal in how it's accessible for people around the planet. Most people on the planet have no chance of going to space right now, and that's very saddening. And I think even for, the foreseeable future right now, there's no way to see a future where you can just go into space without having at least some kind of decent amount of money to pay for that trip. Even if we get the price down to $100,000 per ticket to go to space, that's still a lot of money, and far more than probably like 90 or 95% of the human population can afford. And so it would be nice to open this experience up in different ways for people. And so I think meditation, and then things like AR and VR experiences, seeing pictures and video from space, I think that's the route that we have right now available to us for most people to have this experience.
I agree. VR is definitely a really powerful tool, and I really imagine it'll be the main method of education in the future. But I do want to circle back to your meditation journey. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what experiences you've had and what it means for you.
Yeah. When I've been training in the martial arts for almost all my life, for 35 years now. And when I was a young child, I started off in a karate school. We were doing Tang Soo Do, so a Korean style martial art very similar to karate. And my earlier instructors, we would do this thing where they would have all the kids in the kids' class sit down before and after class and cross our legs, put our hands on our knees, close our eyes, and then they would say, "Now clear your mind." And they'd be quiet for like 15 seconds or 30 seconds. And even as a young child, I realized that wasn't helping me do anything. When they would say clear your mind, like instantly, like the monkey mind, as Buddha puts it, like takes over, and just like the wandering mind, all these thoughts would start rushing in from the day at school, talking to friends, some of the books I was reading, video games I was playing. Like I couldn't filter any of it out. It was just a barrage of thought. And I know now in my own meditation experience that if you want to help somebody kind of experience, a realm of meditation that works for them, telling them to clear their mind is not going to help at all. That's like putting someone in front of a big panel with a red button in the middle and say, don't push the red button. All they're going to think about is, can I push that red button now? So, as a young person, I wasn't really experiencing a meditative process that really worked for me, and a practice that worked for me. But then as I started getting older and I started reading more about different religious approaches, not just to meditation, but to spirituality in general, to understanding our place in the universe, I started learning more about psychology and science and what we understood of human experience. It made me want to understand meditation a bit more for myself. And so I started reading about meditative practices and meditation itself. We talk about meditation. A lot of people in their mind, they hear the word meditation, they kind of imagine like the guru, sitting down, legs crossed, and kind of like having this transformative spiritual experience. And, they're going to a magical place. But there's a lot of different practices that are meditative. There are moving meditations. You find it in running, you find it in Tai Chi and yoga. You can have meditative experiences in a lot of ways. I personally find my own weightlifting experience. I approach weightlifting with a mindfulness approach where I like to feel myself in the moment, in my body, and really be present with myself. And so that's meditative. But really getting into a practice of meditation, I think is helpful to experience the sitting meditation in some form. And so there's lots of approaches, and I've tried a lot of different things. I'll say, like I think everyone who wants to approach a practice should try a few different types of meditations and see what may or may not work for them. I've found some that just aren't really my thing so much. They just don't connect with me in a way that I find as helpful for myself or as useful for my. But I found a lot of value in practices like Vipassana metta, mantra style meditations. And my own personal experiences, it's kind of interesting. It's almost like a psychedelic experience the first time that you have this moment where you realize that you really did transcend yourself for a moment, and you actually took a moment to realize that thinking part of your mind is not necessarily the only part of your mind that can experience things, and that there's a part of you that can actually view that thinking part for a moment. And it's kind of wild. It's kind of a trip, just to experience it. And I do worry sometimes when people have that experience for the first time or the second time or the third time, that they then think that that's all meditation can be for them. They try to chase the dragon and find that experience again, when after a while, when you practice meditation, you realize that every single time you come to it, there's going to be a slightly different experience. You're going to be in a slightly different place. And when you do have that transcendent kind of moment, coming out of it, you're always a different person. And so I think meditation has so much value for us. Whenever I come out of meditation, I feel better in my day. I've had time for myself, just to be with myself and just experience being human for a little bit, and I think that's very valuable for everyone. And so I am getting certified to be a meditation instructor now. I finally decided that after all these years, I've been sharing meditations with other people. I've led some small groups. I'm like, well, maybe it makes sense now to explore even deeper and get certified and really kind of get into this realm of meditation, especially since, again, I think meditation kind of does bring us the overview effect down to earth. It brings it here for us to have in our own chairs and in our living rooms or offices or our bedrooms, wherever we find time, even out in nature. I love meditating outdoors when I can. If I go for a hike in the mountains, I love to just be outside by myself and just have a moment to experience being part of the universe.
I agree. It's such a powerful tool, and not just a tool, but a way of being. What kind of positive effects have you seen as a result
Mm.
of meditation?
That's a fantastic question. I will say for myself, we all have our own journeys in this life, and not all of them, are as full of light as we would have wished. And I certainly had my own struggles as a young child with some abuse in my family. And, I grew up with a temper. I saw it at home a lot. I saw rage and, this emotional, just this, as soon as you would stub your toe or hit yourself with a hammer or step on a Lego block, it's, scream and rage and break stuff. And even as a young man, I was very quickly losing control of myself. I noticed myself going off hinged, and I would get into fights. I would have issues in my own personal relationships. It wasn't helpful. It wasn't beneficial for me or others around me who I cared for. And then, exploring deeper in the realm of meditation, kind of, it helped me discover that there is a way to extend that moment between the stimulus and the response. Between the moment that you have a reason to perhaps react, that you actually can experience being in the moment just a little bit longer, enough for you to say to yourself, I don't have to lose control right now. I don't have to get angry. I don't have to scream. I don't have to punch. I might, but I don't have to. And so, having that moment, extending the moment from the time the stimulus happens until you choose to respond, has so much value. And it's one reason I think we should have meditation in schools. I think young children should be learning, how to be present with themselves, how to experience, being in the moment just a little bit more, to find some presence. And maybe that would help a lot more of us to avoid going into those darker places. We look back later and we're like, why did I say that? Why did I do that? I shouldn't have gotten into that fight. I shouldn't have yelled at him or her this way. I shouldn't have said that thing that I knew was going to hurt them because I wanted to hurt them in the moment, and now I feel bad. We could avoid a lot of the pain we cause for ourselves and others if we just extended those moments out a little bit more.
Yeah. It really allows us to open up our identity of the self, which is what really helps us with our relationships to the people, the world, animals. Yeah, it's really invaluable. With life, there's also death. So I'm curious what you think of death within a scientific, philosophical, spiritual context, astrobiological context, or whatever context.
Yeah. I will say for myself, I don't have a belief in an afterlife. I don't personally think that the soul, the experience of being human, is different from the physical experience. I don't think we've quite figured out yet exactly how it all does function. I think we're not quite there, but I think we are getting there to some degree with neuroscience, with explorations of spirituality and trying to understand this human experience through things like meditation and consciousness studies and things like that. And so, and I certainly don't begrudge anyone who does believe in concepts of the afterlife and what might happen to the thing that we're experiencing as our being after we die. But I find immense value in the idea that when we're gone, we're gone. That, it's over for the story of who we are. So my story, my existence as Graham, has been changing throughout my entire life. There have been different memories that have come in. Some of the memories are gone. I've lost them over the years. And so that part of me is already gone. It's already left the universe. I don't remember it. And so it's no longer existent. And if no one else has experience of it, then it's gone. There's no experience whatsoever. And there's this beauty in remembering that, we were all formed from the elements that were born in the Big Bang and inside of stars fusing elements together. Some of us share elements that have been formed fairly recently in our atmosphere as cosmic rays strike nitrogen 14 and turn it into carbon 14 that goes into our food, into plants, into animals that we then eat, that comes into our bodies. It's how radio dating works, but it also means that we have very newly formed carbon being, constantly, added into our bodies over and over. And when we die, that carbon starts to decay. It starts to leave a fingerprint of, the record of our history, of our existence. And there's something really beautiful in that. And there's something very beautiful in the thought that, like, in 4 billion years, 5 billion years, our sun is going to slough off its outer layers and most likely destroy the earth, but blow earth and its elements, including whatever's left of our bodies, if we are still here, out into space. And we may even have elements inside of our bodies that will one day become the bodies of other organisms living eons from now, who will never know that they have elements inside of them from beings who existed long ago. But there's still a beauty in just knowing that we are going back to the cosmos. Even if the experience that we're having, our individual experience, is no longer here, the greater experience of our being is going to go back to where it came from.
Exactly. It's going to go back, it's going to go into other people. Even if our consciousness will not be able to continue experiencing the consciousness, we'll keep experiencing. So that's a really warming idea. Yeah. So I guess my last question for you would be, with everything you've done and hope to do and plan to do, what difference do you ultimately hope to make for the world?
I'll start off with the biggest thing for me is my own son. I have a young child at home now, and being a father has changed me a lot. It's really kind of brought this fun understanding for myself that he gets to bear memory of who I was even after I'm gone. And I will be gone someday. And it could be tomorrow, it could be in 40 years, it could be in 400 years. I'm not quite sure given where medical science is taking us. But I know that he's forming memories of who I am. And so, he will be the record of my existence. And I find a lot of value in that. That really, it motivates me a lot. It makes me feel like I'm making an impact in the world in a very special way, far beyond if I could make any impact in the science I've published and the things I've done with podcasts and shows online and stuff like that. Like, it's the biggest impact for me. But I also can say that I'm so thankful for my role that I get to have now, where I get to talk to so many awesome people from around the world who want to be involved, who are involved in various ways in the science and the philosophy of exploring astrobiology and cosmology and these bigger questions of who and what we are. Ever since I was a young child, I was 5 years old when I decided that I wanted to be a scientist and I wanted to be involved in answering bigger questions about the nature of the universe. And I'm 40 years old now, and I'm still in that realm, being part of this larger questioning of what it means to be human, what it means to be experiencing this, and what it means for us to be coming to a place where we're now traveling out into the cosmos together.
I think that's a beautiful way to end things. But yeah, thank you so much
Yeah,
for this amazing conversation.
thank
I
you.
really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
me too.